Hey guys, thanks for coming along tonight. This is our third time back here and we love coming to Brisbane. Unlike Darwin, they've got Uber. So I've been a pharmacist for 30 years and most of that time I've never seen cannabis as a medicine. I've seen it as a dangerous recreational, highly addictive drug. I don't believe that at the moment. But for the last 3 years I've been looking at the medical benefits of cannabis. And particularly in the area of chronic pain, for some patients it may offer a treatment option. It may not be first-line defence, but for some patients it can certainly provide some good benefits. There are only a few conditions available in Australia for medical cannabis, but over time I believe price will drop and some of those conditions might be broadened. But my journey is from a cannabis skeptic to quite an advocate, and as coming from a skeptic point of view, I feel that I can educate health professionals that this actually is a treatment option for some of their patients. So by way of disclaimer, I'm financially involved with these companies because they're awesome. I run a retail pharmacy in Western Australia and I was the first importer of legal medicinal cannabis into Australia. I imported some Canadian product which I won't be talking about tonight, but the biggest disclaimer I want to give is I'm not a cannabis user. I've never used cannabis medically, recreationally, spiritually or otherwise. My poison of choice is beer because it makes my jokes funnier and gives me flawless dance moves, or so I like to think so. And some of the harm data I'm going to be presenting tonight compares alcohol versus cannabis. And I don't believe cannabis fares too badly, but I'm not going to give up drinking anytime soon. So it came as a great surprise to me that cannabis was widely used in Australia and worldwide pharmacies circa 1930s, and it's used for some of the same things we're rediscovering now, like childhood epilepsy, pain conditions, cancer pain, and I believe Queen Victoria even used it for period pain. And some of these names, I did a bit of digging, a bit of research, I recognise the company names, and they have evolved and morphed from big, these little companies to what's now Big Pharma, who've made their start selling cannabis. Multi-billion-dollar companies. They no longer sell cannabis, but one day they may again. So what happened? Cannabis was banned largely on the basis of the unscientific movie. Some of our other presenters will be talking about it later on, but there was no scientific basis for which they banned cannabis. This movie, Reefer Madness, proclaimed cannabis turned users violent and sex crazed. At the time, the American Medical Association spoke out against it, and a lot of health professionals said, no, we use this as a treatment option, but they were overruled by some bureaucrats who wanted to regulate the medicine. And the same company, same government department wanting to regulate cannabis had previously ran the alcohol prohibition in America, and they previously said there was not a problem with cannabis, but once they found themselves out of a job when they legalised alcohol in 1934 in the US, it was a different story, so they went after cannabis. So the cannabis plant is quite complex, and some of our other presenters will be talking about it tonight, speak of the devil. But in practical terms, the two main pharmaceutical components, which I'll be talking about in a bit more detail tonight, that achieve the effects, are THC, the bit that may get you high, and CBD, which has got good medicinal benefits without psychotropic effects. So there are, I think at last count, 143 different cannabinoids within the plant. There's waxes, chlorophylls and terpenes, but most pharmaceutical products currently contain these two ingredients on the label, so THC and CBD, but I want to make the disclaimer that in future there may be other cannabinoids listed on the labels. So what does THC and CBD do? THC, first up, it provides a stimulation to nausea, a stimulation of appetite, and helps nausea in patients. This is good in patients that require an appetite. As the old story that cannabis gives you the munchies, well, in medical terms, that can prove to be useful. It also acts as a muscle relaxant, which is good for MS patients. And in terms of pain, it not only treats the pain, but helps a few other associated conditions as well. It may cause drowsiness, but that may be put to benefit, particularly in patients that need to get a good night's sleep. CBD, on the other hand, is non-psychoactive, which is quite important to note because a lot of the cannabis medicinal formulas have got only CBD. So to say that cannabis gives you a high is not exactly true. Patients might be getting such low doses, or a CBD-only product that that statement is false. So CBD's got a number of properties that they're still investigating at the moment. Some of the main ones are its anti-anxiety effect, anticonvulsant. They're using it to good effect in epileptic patients, particularly with drug-resistant epilepsy. It's antispasmodic, and it will help in pain, and it's mild anti-inflammatory. Now, adverse effects, most of these are reversible once you stop giving cannabis, and the idea is people have adverse effects, then you lower the dose or withdraw it entirely. So most of these are pretty minor, the dry mouth, roadmap eyes. If there is any psychotropic effects, that is seen as a side effect, not a treatment idea of giving someone this particular form as medicine. Short-term memory impairment is the big one. The elephant in the room is psychotropic effects. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So contraindications, the main one is patients that have a history of psychosis, particularly schizophrenia. Also, other contraindications, patients you wouldn't necessarily give cannabis to, pregnant or breastfeeding mothers, or people with renal problems. Also, the Australian government are concerned of addiction. So anyone else with any addiction history, such as alcohol or drugs, cannabis is contraindicated. There's 4 main drug interactions with cannabis. None of them are serious. In the case of blood thinners, you may need to do regular INRs with warfarin, and it doesn't mean stopping warfarin or blood thinners. You might have to check the levels more regularly. Cannabis is also metabolised by cytochrome P450, so anything else which is metabolised by this pathway should be used with caution. Anything that lowers the blood pressure or causes drowsiness, once again, it doesn't mean reducing, taking away that medication. You may just need to look at reducing the dose somewhat. We had one patient on a 20 milligram blood pressure tablet. They reduced it down to 10 milligram when they started cannabis. So the psychotropic effects, the big elephant in the room, the object of treating patients is to get help rather than high. So the golden rule is to start low and go slow and titrate the dose upwards. You may find it useful to give a nighttime dose. So if there is slight drowsiness, the patient will get a good night's sleep and wake up with a healthy appetite. Also, when using it on children less than 18, particularly in the area of drug-resistant epilepsy, it is a lot more dangerous for kids to have epilepsy and potential seizures throughout the night than to use cannabis. So it's seen as the lesser of two evils. Cannabis and driving, there's been a lot of talk about this, and to a certain extent the Australian laws haven't caught up with what's happening as far as patients being able to use cannabis medically. There's a train of thought that while cannabis might appear in someone's bloodstream, they may not necessarily be impaired. So I've seen some data that shows impairment from cannabis, opiates, alcohol is one of the worst, and even having extra people in the car or talking on a mobile phone, it's not seen as ideal. So the golden rule is if you're impaired with cannabis, not to drive. Now, different states look at cannabis differently as far as testing, and it varies from state to state, as you can see up there. But the golden rule of thumb is if you're impaired, not to drive for 6 to 8 hours later, or if you are taking cannabis. A lot of the medical professionals may ask the patients to sign a waiver, making sure a patient has a carer or a wife or relative drive them around, rather than take that risk. So I first really became interested in cannabis when I saw some overdose statistics from America, what they call the opioid epidemic, and this figure here shows up to almost 20,000 people died in 2013 from pharmaceutical opioids. And as a health professional, I felt quite responsible. I thought, you know, that that it's unacceptable that this many people are dying, especially when almost 0 people die from cannabis. And we pulled some Australian data and showed a similar story. Alcohol killed 779 people from alcohol overdose in Australia in 2012, 577 from pharmaceutical opioids, and cannabis deaths were 0 in 2012 in Australia. In terms of acute lethal toxicity, how this works, it sounds complicated, but the figure on the left is the figure how many doses required to achieve an effect, and the figure on the right is how many of those doses will overdose and kill you. Heroin being the most dangerous on 1 to 6. If you look at alcohol, which is 1 to 10, how this works is 4 beers might get you drunk, 40 beers might kill you. And right down the very bottom on 1 to greater than 20,000, I might add actually any coffee drinkers here, caffeine is 1 to 50, cannabis is 1 to greater than 20,000, and it turns out you have to eat something like a ton of the stuff to overdose. So I always thought cannabis was highly addictive, and it turns out it's very low on the scale. It's far less addictive than a lot of other drugs. Heroin, once again, is the most highly addictive drug on this scale, followed by its close cousin methadone. And alcohol and nicotine are quite addictive drugs. They're both twice as addictive as cannabis, which sits right down here on the scale at number 15, or 0.8 on this scale. Caffeine, if it was on this scale, would be 0.9. Alcohol, my favourite, is 1.6. So I'll talk briefly about the endocannabinoid system. How many people have actually heard of the endocannabinoid system? Quite a few, it's good. There's a growing number of people hearing about it. So the endocannabinoid system is a homeostatic system that was discovered mid-90s, which is why most health professionals never heard about it. And it's a regulatory system, homeostatic system within our body that controls things like appetite, immune system function and pain. And it was discovered by an Israeli scientist and a few other scientists that the body produces natural cannabis-like chemicals that are responsible for these things. And cannabis mimics these chemicals, and there's a number of receptors that cannabis works on in the body. CB1, which is mainly found in the brain, and CB2, which is found throughout the body, including the vital organs and the skin. And it's important to note there's no cannabis receptors in the brainstem, which controls breathing and respiration and cardiac function. And that's why you can have such large amounts of cannabis and not potentially overdose on it, which is important in palliative care patients where you might need to increase the dose as their pain score gets higher and higher and higher. You can't do that in opioids. In terms of pharmacokinetics, I'm going to skip through this. The main thing I want to point out is the difference between smoking cannabis, which is in the red, and the blue, which is oral dose cannabis. I believe smoking cannabis to be a very poor delivery method of cannabis, simply because you get the wrong levels in your blood. You get massive amounts almost initially, which causes patients to get high or psychotropic effects. And different patients take in different amounts of smoke into their lungs. And in Australia, only about 10% of people smoke, so it's probably not a very popular delivery method. Most people would prefer to take something more pharmaceutically elegant, like a capsule or a tablet. As opposed to when you take it orally, it might take about an hour to get to decent levels in your system, but you're getting good medical benefits at this low level over a 24-hour period, like a blood pressure tablet or an antibiotic. So I believe you're going to see a lot more pharmaceutically elegant dosage forms, like capsules and tablets. This is quickly a cannabis inhaler coming out of Israel, which connects to a smartphone, and the doctor and patient can monitor their dosage. Pharmaceutically, cannabis needs to be grown the same from crop to crop, so chronically ill patients get the same medicine every single time. And this is a picture of an indoor grow facility in Canada. I'm just going to skip right to the end because I've run out of time. So I believe cannabis to be a bit of a pharmaceutical disruptor, particularly in pain patients, where it's got good medical benefits, and it's competing with a lot of pharmaceutical drugs that have been researched for ages and had gold standard clinical trials. Cannabis has been used underground for a long time, and I think you're going to see a lot more of it in pharmacies, particularly with the upscheduling of codeine. So yeah, thank you. That's a cannabis vending machine in Israel. There's none on the streets of Brisbane yet, but in the future, maybe one day. Thank you for listening. We look forward to answering your questions at the end, and if you'd like to follow me on Facebook, please add me on Medical Cannabis Research Australia or Paul Ron of Mavor. Thank you.